Okay, so let's update our Node web server to handle the JSON requests that our app is now sending to it. Usually an application would load the data from a database, but for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to be loading it straight from disk. We're going to want to handle GET requests to a URL like this. And then we'll want to get that data from our events controller, which we haven't yet created. And we'll want to handle POST requests too, so that we can save event data from our application. So let's pull in that events controller that we haven't yet created. We'll create that in a minute. We'll create it at that location. And then we'll need to use another npm module called body parser. So let's go npm install that. Okay, now let's pull that into our web server. Now we need to use body parser so that our web server knows how to pull JSON out of the request body and parse it correctly. Okay, now let's go create this events controller, and it's going to have a get and a save method on it. We're going to need Node's file system object to read and write to disk. Alright, now let's create our get method. Now we're going to need to read the file from disk. And we're going to pull the ID from the request parameters. And then we're just going to append a .json extension to the ID. So you can see now when a request comes in, we're going to pull the ID off of the request, and then we're going to expect a file to exist at app data event and then the ID.json. And you can see that I've already created some of those files here. Here's an example. Now this is a lot of data to type in, and you can type all of that in if you wish, but these files are included in the exercise files, and if you don't have access to the exercise files, they are in the demo app.zip file available on the GitHub repository. I'd highly recommend pulling them from one of those locations rather than trying to type it in, because that's a lot of data to try to type in without any errors. Okay, so now we just need to set the content type and return the JSON. Okay, there. Now we're finding the file on disk, reading it in, and then returning it as application JSON content type. Now we're just going to do a similar thing for the save method, only we'll write the file to disk instead of reading it. Okay, there we go. Now when we try to save an event, we'll be able to save it out to disk. Now let's go start our server and check it out. Let's refresh this. And there you can see that we're getting our data back. And if we take a look in the network tab, you can see that we made a request for this data event 1 URL. And the response that we got back from that was JSON. And that's what we're now displaying here. So just as a reminder, the way we did that was in our event data, we used the HTTP service to perform a GET against this URL and then return that data, and that data we passed into our success callback. And that success callback is this function right here. So we called GET event, passed in this function, and then the event data is passed back and we put that on our scope. And now we have our Node server all set up so that it can save and retrieve data from disk.